This is a segregation boundary in the heart of New York City, Junction Boulevard in Queens. Walk down the steps to the east side of the boulevard and you enter a school zone in the Corona section that is 99% Negro. Walk down the steps to the west side and you enter a school zone in the Jackson Heights section that is 87% white. Above it all, most tourists traveling to the World's Fair a few blocks away are unaware that they are passing a boundary that symbolizes for the people who live on either side of the line the mid-60s fight over school integration in New York.
Whether you're going to use a bus, whether you're going to walk, or whether you're going to use a helicopter. If any child has to walk past one public school in this city to get to another public school, it's an infringement upon his constitutional rights.
Mrs. Joan Adabo, a neighborhood leader in the fight against the city's school integration plan, lives in this white middle-class neighborhood called Jackson Heights. Her son goes to this overwhelmingly white public school, PS 149. She objects to having him reassigned so that he will cross Junction Boulevard into this Negro middle-class neighborhood to help achieve racial balance in PS 92, a school that is almost entirely Negro. This transfer will be one of the personal consequences as the Board of Education puts into effect this month an integration technique known as Princeton Plan pairing. The idea is to take the enrollment of the school in the Negro residential area, combine it with the enrollment of the school in the white residential area, and then divide the combined enrollment so that you have a balance between the races in both schools. In the Jackson Heights Corona pairing, all first and second grade pupils in the combined school zone will go to PS 92. All third, fourth, and fifth grade pupils will go to PS 149. Each school will keep its own kindergarten. The result is instant desegregation. PS 92 will drop from 99% Negro to 48% Negro. PS 149 will drop from 87% white to 75% white. In keeping with the plan, the children of Mrs. Wilma France will also have to walk extra steps this fall to experience integration. Mrs. France is president of the Parents Association of PS 92, in effect the opposite number to Mrs. Adabo in the neighborhood dispute.
I am most decidedly for the pairing of PS 92 and PS 149. I think it's one of the best plans for education in a democracy that our children could have today. I think that our children and the children of Jackson Heights will benefit greatly from the smaller class size, from the additional services of all of the specialists. And I think most important of all, I think they will benefit from learning to live and study and play with children of all different backgrounds.
I am not for trying to achieve racial balances in New York City. I am for integration, which now exists. I am for further integration, which I hope will come as time goes by on a voluntary basis. I'm sure it will come by the free choice and goodwill of the American people.
Well, I have been associated with PS 92 for about 6 years. And since I've been there, I would say that it's typical of the segregated school in the North. It has a terrific turnover in teachers. A great number of the teachers are young and inexperienced teachers. The achievement of the students is not what it should be. And another thing is that the expectation of the teachers on the part of the achievement of the students has always been low. I feel that if the pairing goes through, and if we do get the type of teachers who know what they're doing, who can reach each child at his own level and help him and give him the help that he needs, I think that there will be no problem at all.
I tell you that the people of Jackson Heights will definitely not leave their neighborhood school to be shipped out of their neighborhood. If the pairing plan goes into effect in September on opening day of school, that is, if Mayor Wagner refuses to step in and stop this illegal act, there will be very few children involved in the pairing plan. They will be transferred out and into a private school.
To make the pairing more palatable for the white parents, the board has brought PS 92 up from 115th on the list for renovations to the head of the list. The job will cost more than $350,000. PS 149, built a generation after PS 92, was renovated 4 years ago. Class sizes in both schools will be cut to a maximum of 27. After-school study centers will be set up, and specialists in reading, art, and science will be added to the staffs. The educational improvements evolved from plans drawn by whites and Negroes in the parents' associations of the two schools. But special educational advantages in paired schools have not satisfied opponents such as Mrs. Adabo and others in the white Parents and Taxpayers organization in Queens. This group, which sprang up last year, became the base for a loosely federated movement to block the Board of Education's entire plan to bring significant desegregation to Negro children in the coming year. 9 or 10 months ago, the loudest protest was against the use of buses to transport children for integration. Later, when it became clear to the public that no mass busing of children had been planned, the protest shifted to the pairing of schools. In the 4 pairings now planned, a relatively few pupils will have to be bused for distances under a mile. On August 11th, at the Americana Hotel in Manhattan, the 2 main opposition groups, the Parents and Taxpayers Coordinating Council and the Brooklyn Joint Council for Better Education, held a press conference on pairing that was a public relations circus. Cocktail sausages and liquor were served, and the reporters turned the televised session into a debate.
In attempting to achieve racial balance, our school officials are destroying education. The programs presently established and those announced for the future by them make it clear that it would be an abdication of all our rights and, at best, a waste of time for our children to submit to politically inspired sociological experiments.
Mrs. Rosemary Gunning, Executive Secretary of the Parents and Taxpayers Council, announced that unless the board abandoned its pairings, the white parents groups would boycott the schools. Mrs. Gunning, who works out of an office at her home in Queens, has no children, but she likes fighting for causes, as she did several years ago against fluoridation of the city's water. She is a committee woman in New York's Conservative Party and a strong supporter of Barry Goldwater for president. A few days after the press conference, Ned Schnerman of the WNDT News staff talked to her in her backyard.
Mrs. Gunning, why are you opposed to the board's use of the Princeton Plan for pairing schools in New York?
Because it divides families and communities. The children, instead of all in one family attending one school, are obliged to go to separate schools. They leave the neighborhood for at least half of their school year, their school life, and it means that the parents are unable then to attend the parents' associations, to have the older children take care of the younger children, and the children who are traveling to the other neighborhoods have a sense of insecurity being in a strange place in a strange neighborhood.
Mrs. Gunning, what are you going to do, you and the PAT, to see that the neighborhood school concept is preserved?
We shall continue our fight in the courts, right up to the U.S. Supreme Court. We shall continue to beseech the public officials to take appropriate action. And if none of this is effective, or effective before September 14th, we shall not go. The children will not attend the public schools of this city.
Do you mean then that you'll keep the children out of the schools indefinitely?
That will depend upon the parents' decision. We are a democratic group and we vote on all of our action. We will make recommendations to the parents and the parents will make the decision. Personally, I think there would be no point in their going back as long as present conditions exist.
The children, Mrs. Gunning said, will be sent to private schools being set up in apartment houses, theaters, synagogues, and churches. If Mrs. Gunning's words come true, the spectacle of white parents picketing at PS 149 last spring may be enlarged 100-fold this fall. The startling thing about all this, and the thing to remember when you see the headlines that New Yorkers are fighting again over pairing, is that the Board of Education has gone far beyond pairing in its thinking about integration. Today, it is preparing a revolutionary change in the city school system that may make obsolete this piecemeal selection of pairs of schools to be integrated. The big push for an end to de facto segregation in the North came in May of last year when Roy Wilkins and other leaders of the NAACP began a nationwide drive to force boards of education to break up school ghettos. New York City was designated a prime target. In New York, minority group children make up almost the total enrollments of 168 out of the city's 860 public schools. The NAACP, core, and local integration groups got together and chose the Reverend Milton Galamison, pastor of a church in the Bedford-Stuyvesant ghetto in Brooklyn, to head the New York drive. The citywide committee for integrated schools then began a long dialogue with the school board to get it to produce a plan and a specific timetable for desegregation. In June, the State Commissioner of Education, James E. Allen, gave the committee a psychological lift. He issued an order to all school systems in the state to come up with specific plans to end racial imbalance in their schools. The civil rights groups met with board leaders and warned them that they would pull all Negro children out of the schools if the city did not come up with a timetable for integration in keeping with the commissioner's order. On February 1st, the board announced its plan. Not satisfied, the civil rights groups 2 days later staged the first citywide boycott of schools in New York's history. Out of an enrollment of 1 million pupils, 465,000 stayed away that day. Classrooms in the ghetto schools were emptied. The board, at the direction of its president, James Donovan, had offered a plan to pair 42 schools in fringe areas, desegregating 21 of them. It also proposed to change the feeder patterns of 10 segregated junior high schools to give them better racial balance. But for the citywide committee, this was not enough. The board, Mr. Galamison charged, had failed to come up with a specific timetable for desegregating not just some, but all the schools.
This boycott represents, in my opinion, a clear mandate from the people of New York City that they are not satisfied with the halfway desegregation program that Mr. Donovan offered, and that they are willing to hold their children out of school to see that the Negro and Puerto Rican children, as well as the white children, get a fair shake in our school system.
Although it defended its proposal, the harassed board asked Commissioner Allen to step in and evaluate its progress in an advisory report. But now, with the board appearing to panic before the civil rights groups, the two white opposition groups staged a protest of their own at City Hall. Despite snow and rain, about 15,000 parents came out on a cold March day to put pressure on Mayor Wagner to keep the board from pairing schools. The mayor did not act, but the board itself backed off. It began to prune its list of schools to be paired. This incensed Mr. Galamison and some of the other integration leaders, and within a week they brought off a second boycott. Because of a dispute over tactics, they acted this time without the support of the NAACP and the National Office of CORE. Still, they succeeded in taking out 300,000 pupils, a sizable show of discontent among parents of children in the ghettos. The board at this point seemed to be tacking with any new wind that approached gale force. To the board's surprise, Commissioner Allen set a new course for the board at a press conference in May. He made public a report in which his advisory committee said the board had not done nearly enough to end segregated schools. Although it did not rule out the pairing technique, the Allen report called on the board to broaden its approach through a complete reorganization of the school system.
They will have to decide for themselves whether or not they accept this report or modify it or what they're going to do. As I indicate in my letter to them, I hope that they will make a firm decisions as soon as possible, and that we think this report offers them an opportunity to map a sound course of action for the future of education in the city.
The heart of the Allen Plan was a proposal that would put ghetto children into an integrated school 2 years sooner than at present. Today, a child from the center of Harlem normally sees no white children in class until he leaves his neighborhood elementary school at the end of 6th grade and enters a larger junior high school that cuts across white and Negro boundaries. Instead of the present grade structure of 6 years elementary, 3 years junior high, and 3 years high school, the Allen Report proposed a restructure of the 12 years of schooling into 4, 4, and 4. This way, a child would spend only 4 years in a primary school, drawing from a small white or Negro neighborhood. He would then go to a larger middle school, drawing from both white and Negro neighborhoods, with shuttle busing provided if necessary. The idea is that the child is bigger now, and if necessary, he can travel longer distances to school. From 9th grade on, he would go to an even larger, better integrated high school. The Allen Plan doesn't eliminate the neighborhood school concept. Rather, it enlarges the neighborhood concept so that a child goes to what, for his grade, is the neighborhood school. The report conceded that for the first 4 years, ghetto children would still most likely be going to segregated schools. Thus, the Allen Committee dared for the first time to say that it is impossible to desegregate small schools in the heart of the ghetto. The ghettos are just too large. And, said the report, neither planning nor pressure can change that fact. But the plan did insist that, especially in fringe areas, more desegregation than the board had provided for was possible and desirable. 16 days after the report was made public, Calvin E. Gross, superintendent of New York schools, came up with the city's adaptation.
We're going to be able, with this new set of techniques and ideas, to give a better integrated experience to hundreds of thousands of boys and girls. We will have better ethnic balance in many of our schools, and thousands upon thousands of children will have better educational opportunities, a better chance to learn. We have used the Allen Report to a great extent, and we have also used some of the ideas of our own, such as preparing schools, which are entirely consonant with the recommendations in the Allen Report. All in all, we are very pleased that we have now reached the point of decision and are ready to go forward.
As Dr. Gross explained it, the plan would move toward reorganization of the school's grade structure this year by taking 6th graders from segregated elementary schools and moving them into partly integrated junior highs, and by shifting ninth graders from the junior highs into well-integrated high schools. Rezoning of fringe areas for integration would go on as before. And next year, he promised, the first of the true middle schools will be instituted. In addition, the city's free choice transfer plan will continue. This permits Negro pupils, at their parents' request, to be bused to better integrated schools outside their neighborhoods. Jacob Landers, the board's chief of integration planning, believes with Dr. Gross that the mechanics of achieving racial balance, though important, are no more important to the city's integration future than quality education.
For 10 years, ever since the Supreme Court decision of 1954, it has been the policy of the Board of Education to secure greater integration in the schools as quickly as practicable. The plans proposed for September '64 are intended to reduce further the gap between policy and practice. They are limited, they are practicable, and they represent sound education for all the pupils involved. These plans may be summarized under two headings: equality of educational opportunity for all children and the promotion of ethnic integration. These two aspects are mutually dependent. The one reinforces the other. Thus, quality education, by definition, should include the factor of ethnic integration, and improved ethnic distribution is often meaningless unless it is accompanied by programs of improved education.
In line with this idea, the board has begun a saturation program, doubling education services in ghetto areas where Negro children have not had the opportunity to achieve as well as white children. The kernel of this planning is the addition of pre-kindergarten classes in ghetto schools. With this added preparation, as children reach primary grades, they will be up to the achievement levels of children outside the ghetto. A number of educators and some civil rights leaders think that through this program, the board is setting in motion educational forces that eventually may break up the ghettos. Give a child a good education, this theory goes, and he can get a good job when he graduates. A good job makes him able to move to a neighborhood outside the ghetto, integrating that neighborhood and eventually its schools as well. After some initial reservations, civil rights groups backed the Gross Plan and began working with the board to put it into effect. June Shagaloff, Special Assistant for Education with the National NAACP in New York, is one of the leaders consulting with Mr. Landers.
Ms. Shagaloff, the board's plan will not end segregation in the heart of the ghetto. Why then are you supporting it?
We're concerned not only with the de facto segregated Negro schools, we're concerned also with the de facto segregated white schools and with the racially imbalanced schools that are in fringe areas. So our concern is a much larger one than simply the schools in the ghetto. We have agreed to accept the plans proposed by Dr. Gross and adopted by the Board of Education for these reasons. He committed himself and the school system to formulate the first series of middle schools, desegregated, very substantial desegregation of the junior high schools, and complete integration of the high schools. These plans will be formulated in working sessions with the civil rights groups and with other concerned community groups. And finally, we agreed to go along with the present plans when Dr. Gross committed himself to review the present construction plans for all new schools together with the civil rights groups and other community groups and make whatever changes might be necessary to prevent the creation of new de facto segregated schools. Our agreement then was based not only on the revisions of the most objectionable features for September '64, but on the far-reaching plans for September '65.
How would you say that New York compares with other cities in coming up with a plan for ending racial imbalance in the schools?
New York City has long had a policy, the New York City school system has long had a policy since 1954 recognizing the educational harm of de facto segregated schools and committed to doing something about it. The fight in New York has been that we, the civil rights groups, have said that the school system isn't doing enough about it. In other cities, we are still urging and insisting that school officials recognize that there's a problem and that they have both an educational and legal obligation to do something about it.
What is your opinion of the motivation of white opposition groups, groups such as the PAT?
I, for one, fail to see the difference between white parents in Prince Edward County, Virginia, who protest desegregation and who flaunt the May 17th decision of the Supreme Court by organizing private schools, and the white parents and Pat who call for private schools, private white schools for their white children, to create a white world that does not exist. I think this is bigotry. I think this is prejudice. I think this is the most irresponsible leadership. I think they're a disgrace to their city and a disgrace to their country.
Lawyers for Parents and Taxpayers are beginning to realize that if the group wants to stop the board's widening plans for integration in New York City, it has to attack on a scale larger than pairing. They have challenged the pairing concept in the lower courts and have lost. PAT lawyers, such as Frederick Roos, who heads the Eastern Queens organization, have tried to get a referendum on the November ballot that would forbid transfers of children for racial balance. Now they plan a court suit to prove that balancing of the races does not necessarily help Negroes to achieve and could actually impair white students. Ned Schnerman asked Mr. Roos to give some specifics on the court test.
Yes, well, we'd hope to be able to put on the stand a long parade of people who have an expert knowledge in the field of education and sociology, who would testify that the plans of the Board of Education constitute an educational detriment and will do harm to the education of all children, white or Negro, here in the city of New York. We've had support outside the city. Superintendent Willis of the Chicago school system, Max Rafferty, Commissioner of Education of the state of California, the Negro Assistant Superintendent Dr. Shepard in St. Louis, Missouri. Men of this caliber, men who know their education, their pedagogy, have said that plans like the Board of Education's plan here will hurt education. We're going to try to show that in court.
Mr. Roos, a conservative Republican backing Senator Goldwater, has threatened political action by parents and taxpayers against any candidate in the fall election who opposes the PAT concept of neighborhood schools. At City Hall, Mayor Wagner, too, is considering the dispute in light of election year politics. For 18 months, the mayor avoided being drawn directly into the controversy over school integration. But the threat of a massive white boycott at a time of Negro unrest in the city has forced him to discuss the issue with PAT leaders and thus step into this politically sensitive area. In this situation, an accommodation may be in the making. As part of it, the city might give up future use of school pairings. Pairing, while effective for integrating isolated racial pockets, is not essential to the board's overall plan. In eliminating the focus of complaint of the militant white opposition, the city could still keep its commitment to civil rights groups to work towards citywide integration by reorganizing the school system.
Whenever the responsible white leadership fails by their silence or their equivocation, the leadership falls to the most irresponsible elements of the community. I think this has been some of the experiences in New York City at the present moment and elsewhere, and unless there is outspoken leadership by responsible groups and individuals, then we can look forward, it seems to me, only to greater confusion and conflict in the community.
We think integration is excellent. The only problem is that we feel what the board is doing is not integrating the schools. They're merely trying to achieve racial balance, which is something entirely different. Because integration means the intermingling of people of different types, different races. Racial balance means sorting children according to their color. And that, we think, is an unfortunate. All American children should be considered just children and not children of one color or one race.
The schools are charged with the responsibility of transmitting the values of democracy from one generation to another. These values are not the same, but change and grow with the passage of time. A new dimension is being added to the framework of democracy, and a new criterion by which to judge the success of our efforts. The schools alone cannot bring about a fully integrated society, but with these present plans, we are trying to discharge our responsibility to American democracy. We shall not be deterred from this effort.